What's going on, everybody? It's Brian Tripp. I'm here in Birmingham, Alabama. Welcome to the Real Estate Investing Live podcast. We are REI Live. We interview the very best real estate investors and entrepreneurs all throughout this great country. Today is no different. We have Mr. Chris Prefontaine from Rhode Island. How's it going today, Chris?
Very good. Yeah, the largest state, right?
The largest state.
It's like a dot.
How long does it take to get through Rhode Island if I want to drive through it?
End to end at the widest point, maybe two hours.
Oh, okay. That's a little, I thought you were going to say it was going to be a little bit less than that. Well, Chris, we're very excited to have you, especially since I know your area of expertise. It's more of the creative deal structure. And I really, if you don't mind, Chris, I'd love to get into creative deal structures, some subject to, some lease option stuff, maybe even some owner financing, things like that. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, whatever direction you want to go, that'd be awesome.
Awesome, man. Before we get into all that, though, I would love for you to kind of introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are. I know you've been doing real estate for a very long time. I've known of you for a long time as well. Tell everybody who you are, what you do in real estate, and how you kind of got your start.
Sure. So I'll give you a 10,000-foot view, and if you want to go back, just let me know. So we operate a family company out of Newport, Rhode Island. We buy and sell homes every month on terms. That means no banks, always lease purchase, subject to owner financing. We do so throughout Rhode Island, Mass, and Connecticut. And then we, Brian, as you know, then help other, we call them associates, but there's students around the country do the exact same thing we do here in different states. We've got about 40 or so of those right now active, and a little bit more that are just on the sidelines. So we're doing like 5 or 10 deals a month between us and them.
Awesome. So is this, when you said all, like you're buying houses on terms, is that all you're doing right now, Chris, is terms deals?
Yeah, since the downturn of '08, and then I went over this in my book, so I won't be repetitive, but by the time I worked all that out and then re-engineered this business, it was beginning of 13. So since then, we've done nothing but terms deals. So there is not a property that we're on a bank loan. There's not a property that we put money into unless it came from another deal. Mm-hmm. We don't sign personally. It's all terms.
Wow. And the book you just alluded to is Real Estate on Your Terms, that if you're watching YouTube, you can see I'm holding it up. And if you're watching the audio, we're going to actually give you guys a chance to get this book for free. Chris has been very, very generous by offering us that opportunity. We're going to let you know how you can do that here in a little bit. But Chris, I'd love to know just a little bit more about your story, since I know you've been doing real estate for such a long period of time. What were you doing? How did you even get into it? What were you doing from the very start?
Okay, so I'm going to date myself here, so thanks. But 1991, I started literally, this is a wacky way I get into it, but you've heard of Earl Nightingale, right? He's no longer with us, but I was driving my car and I heard him talk about in the Depression, a guy who stuck lot signs on people's land because they couldn't sell back then during the Depression. And then they would pre-sell it. And so I got this idea to go to landowners, put a sign in their yard, no money down, package a finished house with a builder, and then sell that whole thing. And then once we sold it to a buyer, all the subcontractors and the landowner would wait until the very end when the financing got done and the house got done to get paid. So again, without knowing it, we did everything on terms then. We did about, 100 homes or so over the next few years. And then we bought a Realty Executives franchise. So I put my broker hat on. I never was one before, a realtor. And then I sold that in 2000 to Coldwell Banker, that brokerage business, and then started coaching and doing my own deals from then on.
Chris, how did you learn all the strategies that you needed to have, and you call it transactional engineering, which we're going to talk about here in a second in your book. How did you learn all that to put all that in a package and then sell that package? Where did that come from?
It's just a culmination. I don't think I've ever been asked it that exact way, so it's a good question. Just a culmination of over the years. So way back then it was land. My father had done some land, but it wasn't in real estate really. And then some engineers, got involved and we learned that whole thing. And then the terms business, different mentors around the industry, internet. This stuff's been around, Brian, as you know, since literally the late 1800s. It's not new. It's just that we've kind of made it into a system that people can follow along and predictably do it.
Yeah. No, definitely. Chris, if you don't mind, I'd love for you to, before we really get into the meat and potatoes, which I think is going to really provide tons of value to our audience, I want you to talk. I ask everyone who has ever been on the show who has been in it for as long as you have, I ask them this question because I think it's very important that I got into it in 2012. So I got into it after the bubble hit. I think
Okay.
it's really important to ask the question, what were you doing pre-2008, 2009 that made you have to pivot and shift in order to be successful like you are today? You were successful pre-2008, but in your book, you talk about how it all kind of came down. What happened specifically, and what have you learned from that?
Yeah, and great word, pivot. I love using that word now with every deal. So I love the way you asked that. So running up to it, we had been doing a lot of condominium conversions where we were buying multifamilies and then converting them. So all we did is the engineering and the legal work to turn it into a condo building, and then they'd be selling like you couldn't get paint on the walls. They'd be selling. So what happened when the downturn, it was like they flipped a switch. There was no more commercial funding. There was no more any funding.
Mm-hmm.
And the prices on some of those projects, and I'll give you a specific one, we had a 6-unit and we sold off 3 units at like 172 or 175 each. And then the last 3 we couldn't sell for 50 grand if our life depended on it when the market crashed. So that's a third. And we couldn't do that. And to top it off, as I talked about in my book, we were on all those loans personally. And so that's a mess.
Wow.
It took me from 08 February, I remember it like it was yesterday, till about the end of 12. So good, let's just call it 4 years, to do workouts and short sales and spin up, and liquidate. And just, it was a 4-year full-time job.
How many did you lose, or how many were you in for?
We had around 20 something properties at the time, whether they were singles, multis, or commercial. And I would say, roughly speaking, they all were sold off at either short sale or a small handful, like 3 or 4 of them got foreclosed. And then maybe a couple we kept and, weathered the storm.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, there's so many things we could have done to pivot, as you alluded to, if we weren't on all those bank loans personally, because they got you. What are you going to do at that point? You have no way to pivot. When you have everything being bought on terms, which is what we were forced to do after that, you have room to pivot and you have all kinds of options.
So that's the lesson, I guess, is the lesson you learned was, I don't want to be held personally responsible for personally guarantee any more of these loans. We're going to do everything on terms from here on out.
Yeah, unless it's your own house, just for the listeners to hear this, but even your own house. My daughter and son-in-law recently did their house on a lease purchase. So even if it's your own house, you can do it on terms, but that would be the exception. That'd be like, okay, I can live with that.
Yeah. So just to clarify, you don't do any rehabbing. You don't do any wholesaling. You don't do anything that I guess a lot of people are teaching today.
Okay, so this is a good one too, because we, as a transaction engineer that you alluded to, you should eventually know how to do those in case a lead comes your way, or know who to call, right, to refer to, because you don't want to give away business. But if you're brand new, your first 3 years has to be in one niche, whatever niche it is. So in our case, no. I think the last rehab I did, Brian, would have been, besides my own house, my last rehab would have been about 3 years ago, because we ran across one and did it. Mm-hmm. Did it with a private partner. That's very few and far between. In wholesale, maybe 1 a year, because we get something we can't do anything with, or a student does. But no, we just don't. Here's my take on it, and I don't want to step on toes, and I'm not against any of the wonderful people I've had on my podcast that do wholesaling and rehab. But the fact is that it's super competitive. You've got every Tom, Dick, and Harry with a pickup truck because of the TV shows to go out and do rehab, so the margins are thin. Second piece of that is, in my opinion, the wholesale in the rehabbing does what? It creates a deal. It creates a check. And what are you going to do to get another one? You got to go do another one. Yeah. So in our deals, we create 3 paydays per deal, and that allows some predictability, some cash flow, some stepping off the treadmill. So that's a long answer, but that's why we don't consciously look for them. Got it. So you mentioned the 3 paydays. Let's just jump right on into this thing, Chris. Let's say you get a phone call, you get a lead. I don't want to really talk about the marketing. I don't really want to talk about how you get your phone to ring, because I think we've had a lot of people on the podcast. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Yeah. I want to talk about from the point where you get the phone call. What are you saying specifically to a potential lead, a potential seller? What are you saying to them that allows them to potentially, because these people are calling you, presumably to sell their house, probably for cash. Is the way you kind of put it out there, maybe, at least not in so many words, but they maybe think that, but you kind of flip it on them just a little bit. And maybe it sounds to me like you present them with some options that might even work better for them than a cash offer. What do you say to them specifically? Yeah, so most of them, just to clarify that, aren't just like calling us out of the blue. Most of them are being pre-vetted by a VA, a virtual assistant, who is calling perhaps a for sale by owner or an expired and asking them a little question before we get to them. That little question is, are they open to selling on lease purchase or owner financing?
Awesome.
And look, there's 30 or 40% that say yes, but doesn't mean the no's are no good, because they're usually saying no because they don't know what the heck they're saying no to. So once we get them, whether it's a no or a yes, it's a very simple question. If you're a seller, the only time this doesn't work is if you're a seller and you need or want your cash now. And I tell them this: if you want the best price and you have time on your hands, i.e. you don't have to go buy a house tomorrow with your family and you can wait on the cash out, then this is a great fit for you. So we simply ask that. Are you in a position to wait if you got more out of this, or do you need your cash now or want your cash now to go buy a house? That's really the only question.
So let's say I don't need my cash now. Like, why are you able to offer a better price?
Sure.
If you don't have to give them cash today?
Many of them, I should say, are expired listings. So they're already had in their head they're going to pay a commission. So there's 5% or 6% right there. Mm-hmm. And even if I get them down to where they would have got a full price offer with a realtor, but netted out down here, mm-hmm. even if I pay that, they're doing better because they didn't sell it, right? They wouldn't be talking to me if they're an expired listing. They didn't sell. So that's one issue. The second issue is the longer we go on term, Brian, think of it. We get principal pay down. We get the benefit of principal pay down on any underlying loan that we're paying on. So the longer we go, technically, I don't care about price as long as I get a long term and my loan comes down, because that benefits me, not the seller doing their property with me. And
you're going to almost end up getting that cash price anyway by the time that term has been paid down. So I want to dig into more detail about that. But before we do, I really want to kind of focus on, you've got 9 steps to success in your book, starting on page 43. And I really want to, I don't want to give away too much because I want you guys to go and get this book. And we're going to give you a link on how you can do that here in a second. But the 9 steps, I really don't want to talk about the first few because, again, it talks about more like lead generation type of stuff. Yeah. I want to start with talking about step 4, where you say placing the lead or the property into the proper bucket. What do you mean by that?
Okay, great. So you call me, let's go back on your conversation. You call me and you're open to waiting on your cash out. You see that you can get more. You do have an underlying debt. If you have an underlying debt, I'm down to only 2 of the 3 buckets. And that would be either a sandwich lease purchase, where I'm going to go ahead and rent own out because you have debt on it, mm-hmm. or a subject to purchase. And frankly, most sellers out of the gate cold aren't easy to approach with subject to if they get equity and they're not stressed. So we go in with a lease purchase, unless they're totally wigged out, stressed, need it out of their name for some reason, and want to sell it to a subject to. Usually the bucket is sandwich lease.
And just the third one, just for my clarification, would be just a cash offer. Is that what the third one is?
No, good question. So the third one would be, you say to me, look, and we get these all the time. I'm debt free. I'm free and clear. I don't have a mortgage. I want my price. I'll give you your term. Well, we structure that. When I say owner financing to you, what I mean, because it means a lot of different things to your listeners, it means to us that the property is debt free. It's free and clear. And we're making principal only payments. That's the key here. Very cool deals. And so if you're debt free, I say to you, look, we got a couple different options here. And I explain that and the lease purchase. But on that one, picture this. If you're asking, I'll make up a number, $400,000, and we agree to $1,500 a month principal only, can I afford to maybe add on $5 or $6 grand premium to your house if you give me 4 years? Yeah, I just ate it up with 3 or 4 payments. It's a no-brainer. But they think, wow, I'm getting a premium. So the longer they go in term, the better it is for us.
So the 3 buckets, you say step 4 is placing the property or the lead into the proper bucket. The 3 buckets are owner financing, subject to, and sandwich lease options, correct?
Yep, that's the main 3.
So I don't want to talk about subject to because I just feel like that's an enormous rabbit hole.
Yeah, whole can of worms.
Yeah, so I really just want to focus on, you kind of alluded to owner financing. I really want to focus on that sandwich lease option. Let's just say and it sounds to me like that's probably the majority of what you're doing.
It outweighs owner financing because there's about a third of the properties in the U.S. that are debt free. It's not like those are as prevalent, right? So yeah, I'd say it's like 2/3, a third.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So let's focus on that. 2/3 sandwich lease options.
Yeah.
Let's focus on that because I think that's huge. The biggest thing I'm hearing today, and I've done a couple, but I'm not an expert like you are. The biggest thing I'm hearing today about sandwich lease options, 2 things. One is they're not as prevalent today as they were in 2009, 10, 11, when a lot of people were coming out of the mortgage crisis, had facing foreclosures, couldn't get qualified for loans. What do you say to that point?
Well, it's funny because I didn't know about them then, and I've been in the business for 20 years by then, right? And I never did them. I didn't know enough about them, which I racked my brain on. But here's my answer to that. You're really talking about the ones that are stressed and need debt relief. That's one category of many. The other categories that we see would be people like, in no particular order, they're leaving the state, they got a job reload, they got divorce, sickness, death. We see all these, unfortunately, right? Life happens. And so that category of 9, 10, 11 would be the stressed people. Great. That's a category. And then we have all these other categories. Now, do you still have the people that are looking for debt relief? Do you still have loans that are coming up that have variable payments? Yeah, it's crazy. So we're still getting a lot of that.
Yeah. And then the other thing I hear is it's very difficult to execute them through the whole entire process. I've heard statistics. I mean, statistics are like, you can just make them up, right? I mean, most of them are just crazy, made up anyway. But I've heard some pretty heavy statistics that by far most, don't actually pan out when it gets to the buyer actually coming through and being able to purchase the property and cash you out.
I was hoping so much that you'd bring this up. This is where we differ.
No, well, this is what I've heard. And so I think that, someone who's doing 2/3 of your transactions, you're doing, dozens and dozens of these every year. You're the guy to ask. Is it us? Is it the person that's the one-off guy doing 1, 2, 3, 4 of these? That's the issue? Or is there actually an issue here where most are not converting?
There's 2 issues. Big, but they're both big. There are people right now, so I'm not talking out of school, on YouTube, okay, well-known educators that are saying publicly, hey, Brian, you can do lease options. You put your rent-to-own buyer in and you take the deposit. And who cares they don't get financing? You do another one. And I say, morally and ethically, forget legally. Morally and ethically, that's a nightmare. If that person can put their head on the pillow at night and say, "Yep, I could care less," that's awful. But they're doing it. It's online now. So that's one. So they're being educated. Second piece of this, more important, is forget morally, ethically, and legally. This is a very important piece. So we have a mortgage specialist. We always have, but we got better and better with it. That vets these people so that they are pre-qualified. After we accept them in-house, they have to have a mortgage ready plan with him where he says to them, A through Z, here's how you will be mortgage ready. And here's when you'll be mortgage ready, provided you take these steps. You don't drive your credit cards up. You don't go take on stupid debt. You don't miss you guys keep the plan. But then and only then do we say, okay, Brian, you're accepted. Now we put you in the home. So now we have a game plan to get you cashed out. You stay with that mortgage lender and pre-qualifier and credit enhancement specialist. You stay with them. Now you have a plan of success. So our ratio is the complete opposite. We get anywhere between 1 to 3 a year that have a life event and they can't cash out. That happens. Death, divorce, heart attack, I've seen it all. But 95% or so are cashing out, and it's a great thing. So we're forever, because I've been doing this a while, there's not a month that goes by where there's not a closing or a cash out, which is pretty cool.
You said 95%?
Yeah.
It's insane. Yeah. I've never heard of that before.
Our students too. You got to follow that second piece though. That's the key. If you don't have that, you're winging it and you're asking for a headache.
And Chris, I've heard of that. I've heard people that are doing that and they're still not seeing that kind of success. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I tell you what, I'll share his name if you want me, but I just did a video with him last night. And I said, let's do a video on YouTube and explain what the heck it is that you do, because this guy does lease purchases and he's a mortgage broker. It's a cool combination.
We can do that. We can definitely do that.
Okay.
So let's talk about the nuts and bolts here. We've kind of given a lot of generalities. Let's talk about the nuts and bolts of a lease option, a lease purchase, rent to own, as you might call it, refer to it. Yeah. Give me a couple of specific keys to, we kind of talked about the lead that comes in and what you're going to say to them, but the keys to making something like that happen.
The agreement's super important. I mean, when we started in 2013, I had a decent agreement and it's been tweaked every time we hit a roadblock, a stumbling block, maybe a challenge with a seller or a buyer, frankly, we tweak our agreements. And so our attorney's now been doing terms deals with us for, 4 or 5, almost 6 years. So the agreement would be my short answer. Super important. Use the right one, right?
Okay. So let's talk about that agreement, because I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an important piece. And I want to kind of get to this down the road a little bit about, because you mentioned, if you're brand new, your first 3 years in the business needs to be focusing on one niche. You said that earlier, and I want to get back to that.
Sure.
But the person that's a little bit newer to this, to get an agreement, to make sure that they have the right attorney, the biggest challenge I've seen is finding the right attorney that knows exactly what they're doing, knows this process. So how do we get a great agreement, Chris?
Okay, so two things. I'll give some advice.
And what should be in that agreement?
Yeah, I'll give some advice, generally speaking, and I'll tell you how we've handled that over the years, because you're 100% correct. Can be a challenging thing, even for me, and I've been at it for a while, to go call, cold to a particular state and get that set up. So we do a couple of things. I tell people that are just on their own doing their thing without being connected to us, just check with the local RIA first or a local meetup, because usually there's an attorney there that's doing creative real estate and gets it, right? And it might take one or two to get through that. Secondly, our students have access to all our forms. That's a pivotal part. It doesn't mean that I can say to you right across the board they work in every state. It means they get a good base. Now you go check it out with someone locally. Third, we actually offer our package where our attorney, and we've done this recently and they love it, our attorney here in Rhode Island calls the market, finds one, vets one, and then calls our students and says, here you go. That's pretty cool. Pretty cool. Takes the guesswork out.
Chris, for the people that are just listening and want some really good instruction and some education, give me a couple of key specific pieces that are in your agreement that you've had to learn to later either put them in or tweak them.
Two big ones come to mind when you said that. One is in no order. One is the ability to assign that contract back to the seller.
Yes.
Or to a buyer.
Some call that wholesaling lease options.
Yep. Joe does a great job with that. Well-known name. He and I are friends. Does a great job with it. But most sellers don't care at the time they're signing it, because they wouldn't go with you if they didn't trust you. And frankly, in all the hundreds of deals we've done, Brian, I think we've assigned back to the seller like 2 that became a headache for whatever reason. 2. So it's just nice to sleep at night knowing you have that. The second piece we learned a real big way is in our agreements now, it says you as the seller are responsible for any mold, lead, or asbestos that you might not have disclosed or we might not have caught, because they fill out the seller's disclosure, but some get amnesia and they might forget something. And so we ran into a major lead issue. It cost us $32,000. And so we put that in all our agreements now.
Wow. Those are 2 really good tips, because I would never, the second one for sure, I've never thought of, but to be able to talk about why the importance of being able to assign, I'm assuming, there's usually 2 documents here, and correct me if I'm wrong or tell me how you do it. There's usually 2 documents when it comes to a lease option or a lease purchase. There's the option agreement, and then there's the actual lease that you're signing.
Okay, so you are correct with how we sell. We have a lease purchase agreement. It's a lease, and then it's a rider for the purchase option. That's so that if you ever had to go to tenant landlord court, that's a separate issue. That's a civil issue. You're just dealing with the lease. That's why we do that on the sell end. But on the buy end, it's one simple 4 or 5 page agreement. And we want did you say why the assignability in it?
Yeah, just the importance of the assignability.
Yeah. Well, I could give you a number of scenarios, but think about this. You're the seller and the market dives 30%. And I just started with you when we had a crash again. I call you up because I have the assignability. I go, look, Brian, we need time here. Clearly, the market has to come back. The loan has to come down. We need to extend this thing 3, 4, 5 years. You're amenable to that because you don't want the house back. But if I don't have that back, what could you do as a seller? You could say, I want to hold you to the agreement. Now, our agreements, another piece that are in our agreements, limit our liability to our deposit on the property. But still, it's a headache. You don't want that PR. You don't want that morally and ethically. Our deposit on the properties are $10. That's our exposure, just so you know that.
Yeah. So what would you do in that scenario? You just assign it back to them then, and that's in your agreement?
If they got belligerent and didn't want to extend it or kind of be in the game, yes, just say, okay, I'll give it back to you. You can rent it out, do whatever you want to do with it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really important. So you're assigned that initial agreement that you have with the seller is what you have that's assignable.
Correct.
Gotcha. So we got a seller now, Chris, that you've convinced them this is the right way to go, that this is something that's going to make sense for them in their specific circumstance. They want to do a lease option with you. They're going to sign that agreement. You are now finding a tenant buyer to go into that property. I've heard that if you're going to be doing this, lease options, you really need to be doing it. It's really difficult to just do kind of one off or two offs because of this point right here. To be able to find that qualified tenant buyer that it sounds to me like you have a pipeline full of them. You're constantly working on that part of it. But for me, or for maybe someone who's watching this or listening to this, that maybe they just come across a deal and it's a great candidate for a lease option, but I don't have that pipeline full of buyers, tenant buyers. Give me some tips. What can I do as the guy who's going to do like a 1 or 2 off or a 3 off type of deal? How can I find that tenant buyer? Qualify.
Okay, the good news is a lot of people bring up this question relative to how wholesalers and rehabbers, as you know, teach to build a buyer's list first. We don't. You don't need that. And I remember like it was yesterday in 2013, I got the first property. This goes to your question. And then you market it. How do you market it? Craigslist, rent links. We have other things now that are bigger, but the basics are just basic online things. Now you'll build your buyer list by that first property to the tune of 50 or 100 buyers right away. So we don't teach to build a buyer's list. You shouldn't actually online. You're not supposed to do that if you don't have a property. So we wait till we get a property anyway. Now, but to your point of focus and, can you be in it? You got to, I would say, do a half a dozen deals a year. But that's quite lucrative, half a dozen deals, to be kind of in it and have your system set up. Sure.
Do you recommend, it sounds to me like you don't really recommend someone just to do one of these a year, like a 1-off or a 2-off type of thing?
Well, I actually tell people, some of our associates that are actually like lock arms and do deals with us, that even if you did 1 or 2 deals a year, or you did your own home every year, it's worth going through the training and understanding how to bop and weave and pivot in real estate. Yeah. I mean, let me tell you why I'm saying that, by the way, and you probably saw this in the book. Our average deals, 3 paydays, have gone up since the book even. Right now for us, around 75 grand. Our students range from 45 to 110 grand. This morning, Brian, now this is interesting. This morning, and I said to this kid, I got to do a video with you. It's his first deal with us. Now, this is not the norm. I'm just saying this for your listeners. Disclosure, not the norm. This guy's got 182 grand, 3 paydays on a purchase of 520.
It's awesome.
Let that resonate for a minute. That's just pretty good.
That is like 3 years, 4 years salary for the average worker.
I told him, it's your first deal. You just got like 3 deals. I said, could you be a little more excited on the phone with me today?
I feel like I have the same issue. I got some coaching students too. And I'm like, dude, you just did your first deal, right? Yeah, I did. So you've mentioned this a couple of times, and I haven't specifically asked you, Chris. You've mentioned the 3 paydays. Let's talk about those. What are the 3 paydays, and why is it important that we have those 3 paydays?
Yeah. So the first payday is the non-refundable down payment that comes in. That's your payday 1. So that's cash now. Cash over time, which if you think about any business in anyone's personal life, is cash flow monthly, even if it's a little bit a good thing. Yeah. So the payday 2 is the difference between what you're paying out to the mortgage company or to the seller financing and what you're collecting. Our average is small. It's like $308. Not enormous, but picture 2 or 3 of those a month coming in. That's nice. And then the third payday is the cash out, and the cash out could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. But what's included in that? All of the principal pay down benefit plus the markup in the price, less of course any down payment. But that's a big back end.
What's the risk to doing the lease option? I know you're not signing anything. There's no guarantee. You're not personal guarantees. What risk is there? What's the downside to doing deals like this?
Yeah, well, the downside, not legally, but just headache-wise and stress-wise, would be if the market crashed and you didn't have that agreement I mentioned. That would be a headache and a half. The other downside would be making sure you dot the I's and cross the T's on if there's any of those issues I mentioned earlier about lead, asbestos, and all that. Because yes, you got it in the agreement, but when push comes to shove, if that comes up, someone's got to pay it. And you got to make sure you cover it. So those are things. Nothing in the terms business is a headache if you have time.
Yeah. So to me, and we're talking specifically about lease options now. We're not really talking about owner financing or the subject to stuff. To me, the lease option stuff is so laborious. There's so much to it. There's so many different moving pieces, and especially if you're doing 2, 3, 4 deals at a time, managing tenants. You're a property manager. I mean, you've got all this stuff going on versus a wholesale to get in and out very quickly. Like, just talk about that for a second, your perspective on how you see it.
You open up a few things that are interesting. So we don't property manage only because all of the buyers in their agreement, their rent-own agreement, they're taking over responsibility. And this is a conversation we have, just as if they own it. So I say to them, you're going to act, behave, and pay for things like you own it. You just don't have a mortgage in your name yet.
But let me talk to that point for a second. You're 100% correct, obviously. But the pushback might be something like, well, as the person, I don't own the property, but I'm responsible for the property. I control that property as the investor. I still need to do, I guess just check and make sure that they're in the property, check to make sure that, what if they're paying on time, check to make sure that the property's not being destroyed, things like that.
You're correct. So we manage that two ways. We use Appfolio, but for the smaller person, you would just do it yourself. And what does that mean? You got to make sure the collections are good, clearly, because if they screw up on one of those, they're not getting their financing. They got to show the monthly rents on time. So yes, you'll manage that, and then you'll manage to be safe and conservative about an every 6-month walkthrough to be safe.
What's the average amount of time it takes for your tenant buyers to cash out?
24.
So that's 2 years, Chris. I mean, that's not such a short amount of time that's something that I'm personally burdened with, where I'm trying to create a business that kind of operates without me a little bit, where it sounds like I'm going to be burdened. And this is my pushback. I want you to give me a response. I'm going to be burdened with, in 2 years, I could have, if I'm in your system, I could have 10, 12, 15 deals going at one time.
Oh, you would. Yeah, you would. So here's the price of the burden, right? So you said earlier, and I didn't address it. So wholesaling, correct. But to do another wholesale January 1st, say you did 10 last year, you got to wake up and you got to find 10 more. In this, 6 months in, I can look at my spreadsheet and say, I have $6,000 a month coming in payday twos, and I have $250,000 cashing out between year 1 and 4. And I can take 6 months off if I want. That's pretty cool. And that's accurate. That's not a stretch. So there's a trade-off there, no question. Now, as far as hands off, I worked that from 13 till about the end of 15. And then my son-in-law, my son, and my daughter took over. And so they do all the buying, all the selling, 100% of what we do. So you can absolutely run it. We have a course, for example, called Seller Specialist, where I take you cold and I say, here you go. Here's the course. You go. You're going to do all my buying and selling. Just like the wholesalers and the rehabbers do. Mm-hmm. Only the profit's a lot better.
Can be. So, Chris, before we go, this is something I really think is important. You already alluded to it, and I really want to I want you to dig a little bit deeper. I want you to really kind of expound upon this a little bit. You said in the first 3 years, roughly, that someone who's brand new needs to pick one niche and stick with it. Talk about why you said that and what you meant by that.
Yeah, just my opinion. From having my show, and you probably agree with this, I just see a whole bunch of shiny objects getting in people's way. And so I'm not so naive to think it's my niche. I don't care if they pick wholesaling, tax liens. They're all great, but pick one. Find a mentor that's in the trenches doing it, not did it 20 years ago. And then just don't let go and don't look left or right for 3 years. It's just my opinion, so that you can build a monster business. The people that come into any one of those niches, Brian, and say, I'll try it, absolutely drives me crazy. The I try thing. And you can't do that, in my opinion, in business. Yeah.
And so I totally agree with you. I'm 100% agreement with you. And to expand upon what you're saying, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, Lease Options is going to be, wholesaling is not really real estate. Wholesaling is like marketing and sales, right?
That's interesting. Yeah.
This is real estate. Like Lease Options is, you are in the trenches. There's a ton to learn here. I feel like especially as a brand new guy, brand new person, you need to really, if you're going to do this, you need to do it, and only this.
As far as in the real estate world, yeah. So if you have a part-time job, a full-time job, and you're looking to do something part-time.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about real estate. Within real estate, I'm brand new. I'm getting started in real estate, and I want to pick a niche. I want to pick Lease Options. And I'm just like, then let's do Lease Options. I don't want to teach someone wholesaling, and then we get a certain deal that's going to be better for Lease Options, and then kind of teach them how to do that as we go while they're still trying to wholesale. It's like, hey, let's give that to someone who specializes in Lease Options and maybe get a referral fee.
I agree 100%. Yeah, either or, not both, until like we now have done enough where we can pivot and do one of those. But no, we don't try to go looking for extra outside of our niche. That's awesome. They're all separate businesses, Brian, right? You know that. They're all separate businesses.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Chris, I think that this has been really awesome. I really do appreciate you getting deep into the more of the creative stuff, and for an opportunity to learn more about Chris and learn more about what he has to offer, not just with, I know we focused on lease options today, not just lease options, subject twos, owner financing, lots of other creative things. Chris, tell everybody how they can get a copy of your book.
Yeah, sure. And when I say this, I want to clarify. So I go on all the time online. It says get my free book, and you go and you got to put your credit card in for shipping. I'll send the book. No, we'll pay for shipping. So it's 100% free. And just go to free, SRECbook.com. So SREC standing for Smart Real Estate Coach. Free SRECbook.com.
Free SRECbook.com. Go, guys, get this free book. Chris was very generous to send it to me and signed it for me. I really do appreciate that, Chris. And I went through it. It's a great book if you're new. So if you're, and Chris, by the way, we have a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are newer.
Fantastic. I'm glad they get it. Yeah.
If you are newer, maybe you've been, paralysis analysis. You've been listening to the podcast or maybe watching this on YouTube for a while and you never took action. Let this be your first action step. Go ahead and get this free book. It's unbelievable how practical it is. And so I really do appreciate you writing that. And then and then Chris, you also gave us a couple other resources. We can go to smartrealestatecoach.com to watch a webinar that you do. Tell us what we'll find in that webinar.
Well, unfortunately, you got to deal with me for another 55 minutes if you don't mind listening. So if that's okay, it's free. So you're going to go to smartrealestatecoach.com, find the free webinar on there. And in that, I'll walk you through as much content as is possible within 50 minutes or so. And then if you think that that's a niche that we just talked about that you'd like to chase down and focus on, as Brian and I said, then great. There's an online course and some things you can get involved in. And if not, hey, you spent a little time in the book, a little time on that, and no harm, because I'm going to actually give you some gifts just for being on there. We do a free strategy call with you where you can pick our brain and we'll give you some takeaways.
Very generous of you. I do appreciate that, Chris. And then last thing, you mentioned your mortgage specialist. I don't know if you want to give that information away.
I'm happy to. He'd be thrilled. So his name is Jesse Mills, Jesse Mills, Mills. And if you want me to give his number, I'm sure he'll be very happy.
How about we do this? I don't want to offend him. Yeah. I think I'm actually friends with him on Facebook.
You probably have.
Can we do like an email or something that's a little less intrusive than his phone number?
Yeah.
Why don't you give me his email offline and then we'll link it up in the show notes.
That sounds great. I'll give it to you later.
Awesome. Chris, thank you so much. Is there anything I missed? Is there anything glaring that you want to kind of add before we go?
No, I loved your questions because they're spot on and high points for people to know. Thank you.
Awesome, man. Well, Chris, we appreciate you. And guys, we love you. Make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. You're not going to believe. I've just booked 2 or 3 guests that are going to blow your mind. You're not going to believe who we got coming on the show. Obviously, Chris has been an unbelievable guest as well. So hit that subscribe button. You can't wait who's up in the next coming week. So we love you guys so much. We will see you next time.